Welcome. In this video, we're going to begin a long journey working through chapter 11 of the book of Daniel. In this video, we'll be focusing on verses 2 to 4. In verse 2, we read, quote, "Now I will announce the truth to you. 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. The 4th shall be richer than all of them. And when he becomes strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece." So we'll begin with the first king of Persia, Cyrus the Great. And then the text says 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. Those kings are Cambyses II, Smerdis, and Darius the Great. We are then told that, quote, "the 4th king shall be richer than all of them." This would therefore refer to the 4th king of Persia, Xerxes I. Of this king we are told that he shall, quote, "stir up all against the kingdom of Greece." And this fact does align with history. We know that Xerxes' father, Darius the Great, began the first Persian invasion of Greece. And when he died, his son Xerxes continued this battle and began the second Persian invasion of Greece, the most famous battle of which was the Battle of Thermopylae, made famous by the movie 300. So up to here, everything aligns quite nicely with history. But in the next verse, we read, quote, "Then a warrior king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and take action as he pleases." Now, there is no doubt as to who this is referring to. It's clearly Alexander the Great, but there is an issue here. The text seems to be saying that immediately after Xerxes, Alexander, and therefore the Greek Empire takes control. And the reason why this is an issue is that there were in fact 8 Persian kings between Xerxes and Alexander. Golden Gay in his commentary writes, quote, "If the assertion that the 4th king will be far wealthier than everyone is to be pressed, it has to allude to Xerxes I, who invaded Greece to be defeated at Salamis in 480. Strictly, there was no Greek empire until the time of Philip of Macedon. The reference of verse 2b as a whole is thus to the 4 kings who followed Cyrus. But the prophecy then has to leap over a century from Xerxes to Alexander." Golden Gay continues, quote, "Thus the figure 4 may not need to be pressed, nor the kings specifically identified. The phrase may denote the Achaemenids as a whole." End quote. So here Golden Gay is telling us not to take these 4 kings literally, rather it represents the Persian Empire as a whole. Newsom agrees with this, writing in her commentary, "The reference to 4 Persian kings is simply the use of a round number, since there were many more than 4 kings who followed Cyrus." So verses 2 to 3 can't be pressed too literally, although I do agree with one author who notes, quote, "The series of crushing defeats suffered by Xerxes at the hands of the Greeks meant that, from the standpoint of prophecy, Greece was on the rise and Persia's end was in sight. The ball had been passed to the Greeks." So following on from this, Alexander defeated the final Persian king, Darius III, making Greece the new global power. The image before you is a Roman floor mosaic, originally from a house in Pompeii. It is most likely depicting the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, in which Alexander defeats Darius, marking the beginning of the end of the Persian rule. So, in verse 3, the description of a warrior king who takes action as he pleases nicely describes Alexander, who at the height of his power has an empire which stretches from Greece to India. Let's now continue on to verse 4, which reads, quote, "And while still rising in power, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted and go to others besides these." End quote. So what is this verse referring to? Well, in 323 BC, Alexander dies, and this triggers a series of conflicts between his generals to take control of his empire. And we know that, in fact, at the conclusion of these conflicts, Alexander's original kingdom is broken into 4 parts. As the verse notes, his kingdom will be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. Also, take note of the phrase, "but not to his posterity," meaning that Alexander's kingdom is not inherited by his physical descendants, although this was originally the plan, but rather to his military generals. Golden Gay makes the following comment on verse 4, quote, "It will divide toward the 4 winds of the heavens. 4 major units eventually emerged from Alexander's fragmented empire, centered on Macedon and Greece, Thrace, Syria and the East, and Egypt. To speak of the empire dividing toward the four winds of the heavens is to use a figurative expression for this fragmentation. The division did not correspond at all closely to the points of the compass. Newsom adds to this, Alexander died suddenly in Babylon in 323, perhaps from a fever. The brevity of his reign over a unified empire and its disintegration into several successor stages is described in verse 4. The reality was far messier than this verse suggests. Newsom is certainly correct when she says that the empire didn't just neatly one day break into these four parts, it was a far messier ordeal. And unfortunately, to correctly understand the subsequent verses in Daniel chapter 11, we do have to pause for a moment and consider how we went from a unified kingdom under Alexander into these four separate kingdoms. It was a result of a series of wars between Alexander's generals, which are known as the War of the Diadochi, Diadochi being the Greek word for successors. In the next video, I'll be providing an overview of these wars, not in minute detail, but just enough to help us understand the next few verses of Daniel chapter 11. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, your support would be greatly appreciated, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. Find the link in the description below. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave a comment, to which I will respond. And finally, make sure you are subscribed to get my next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.